Ah, yes, winter in 1870s London. A delightful topic if you enjoy hypothermia, hunger, and the occasional plague epidemic. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life in Victorian London was a real treat in the wintertime. Join me today as we brave the elements to experience life in London's frozen underworld. The cold came in quietly. There was no dramatic storm or howling blizzard to signal the start of a Victorian London winter. Instead, the temperature would drop 1 degree at a time, creeping into the bones of the city like a ghost. It would begin in late October, with a chill that brushed across cheeks and noses, making young chimney sweeps and lamplighters pull their threadbare scarves a little tighter. But too soon, the air thickened, grayed, and took on a bitter, unmoving stillness. The sort of cold that didn't bite, but rather sank into walls, into clothing, into the lungs. Victorian London wasn't built for comfort. It was a city of contradictions, filled with glittering ballrooms, and grimy alleys, grand houses with roaring fireplaces and slums where ice would form on the inside of the walls. And during winter, those differences became painfully obvious. If you were rich, winter was a season of roaring hearths, thick velvet curtains, hot bricks placed in beds, and dinners of steaming puddings and roasted meats. If you were poorer, most were winter was a slow, wet, shivering march through misery. First, we have to discuss the fog, because London fog in the Victorian era wasn't romantic, no matter what the paintings or novels tell you. It wasn't just mist, it was a thick, choking mix of coal smoke and water vapor, so dense and yellow it was called a pea souper. It wasn't unusual to lose sight of your own feet, to see lamplight turn into a dull halo just inches ahead. People would bump into lampposts, fall into the Thames, or simply vanish into the gloom. You could hold out your hand and barely see your fingers. Now, imagine that, then add the cold and you're only halfway to picturing a typical winter morning in 1870s London. Coal was everywhere. Coal to cook, coal to heat, coal to power the factories. But burning it turned the skies black and the air bitter. During winter, when every home lit its fire against the chill, the city turned into a slow-moving furnace. The soot settled on window panes, on washing lines, on babies' cribs, and the smell, thick, acrid, and metallic, became part of the city's scent. It coated your tongue, clung to your coat, and mixed with the damp of the ever-present rain. For the poor, the choice was simple: freeze or choke. Many lived in single-room dwellings, sometimes entire families crammed into a damp basement flat with no fireplace. And so they sought heat where they could. Some burned old boots. Some burned rubbish. Some simply huddled together in whatever corner didn't leak. There are records of children dying not from the cold itself, but from the damp, the wet rot that soaked their bedding and seeped into their lungs. Diseases loved winter. The cold weakened the body, but it was the damp that delivered the final blow. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, bronchitis all flourished in the dark, moist air. Hospitals filled with coughing, wheezing bodies. And when one person in a slum caught it, the rest might as well have written their wills. They say that in the end, Londoners learned to navigate the fog, to read its shifts and turns, to predict its density, and maybe that's true. But I don't think anyone ever truly mastered it. After all, the fog wasn't just a weather event. It was a living thing, thick and heavy and indifferent to human life. And as the sun set earlier and the moon offered little illumination, the fog became more dangerous, more disorienting. If you were unlucky enough to fall into the river, you might never be found. If you were crossing the street, you could easily collide with another pedestrian. Whole groups of people would disappear into the yellow haze, never to emerge again. The fog was a constant threat, a silent predator that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. In the distance, you heard the faint ring of a handbell, a church bell, perhaps, or a milkman's call. But here in the fog, sound was distorted, voices muffled, bells distant. You couldn't tell where anything came from. You could only stumble forward, hoping to find your way. All around you, the city noises mingled with the fog. The rumble of carts, the hiss of street vendors, the shouts of street urchins, all blended together into a strange, unsettling harmony. In the fog, you weren't just surrounded by sounds, you were enveloped by them. It was as if the fog itself absorbed the city's noise and amplified it, creating a symphony of urban life that was both captivating and terrifying. You could hear the clatter of hooves on the cobblestones, the rumble of carts and carriages, the murmur of voices raised in anger or laughter. And then there were the cries of London's street vendors, the beware of the dog, the hot potatoes, fresh from the oven, the penny for the guy. Each cry was a splash of color in the grayness, a momentary distraction from the all-encompassing fog. If you couldn't see the street vendors, you could hear them. Their calls echoed in the fog, adding another layer to the city's cacophony. Sometimes you could distinguish individual instruments, the twang of a banjo, the lilting notes of a violin. At other times, it was just a wash of sound, a swirling mass of music and noise that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The melodies were a mixture of traditional folk songs and newer, more popular tunes. Christmas carols often rang out, their cheerful notes seeming almost out of place in the murky surroundings. Then there were the more mournful sounds, the whistles and the cries of street vendors trying to hawk their wares. It was a strange mix, a blend of high spirits and desperation that was as unforgettable as it was haunting. And then, of course, there was the wind. London's buildings created channels that funneled icy gusts straight through the city streets, turning alleys into wind tunnels. It howled down cobbled lanes, snuffed out lanterns, lifted hats from heads, and sent newspaper boys diving for cover. Even indoors, it found ways in through keyholes under doors between loose window panes. The poor stuffed gaps with old newspapers, but nothing truly kept the cold out. Food became harder to come by in winter. Root vegetables survived the season, and gruel could always be boiled, but fresh produce was a fantasy. For many, meals consisted of stale bread, boiled cabbage, or if lucky some salted meat. The rich dined well regardless, of course, their tables overflowing with dishes while the poor lined up at soup kitchens. And even those soup kitchens weren't guaranteed. Some opened only when charities could afford it, others shut down early. Hunger, like the fog, drifted through the streets with nowhere to go. There was no such thing as central heating, and hot water required a fire. Public baths were scarce and usually too cold to be tempting. Most people went the winter without washing, which led to sores, lice, and worse. The stink of unwashed bodies mingled with the smoke and fog until it seemed like the city itself was rotting. And let's not forget the workhouses. Yes, the workhouses, those institutions that claimed to offer shelter but more often delivered despair. During winter they became overcrowded as the freezing and starving sought refuge. But space was limited and rules were strict. Families were split up, food was minimal, and the labor was brutal. Still, many preferred it to the streets. Others, however, took their chances with frost. Some slept under bridges, some on park benches, some in churchyards, curled up behind gravestones. London winters didn't offer second chances. Many didn't wake up. But even in the darkest, coldest days, life in London, England still managed to go on. And in many ways, that's what made the city so unique. It was a place where people endured the harshest of conditions, where they huddled around flickering gas lamps, sharing stories and dreams to keep their spirits high. It was a city where the rhythm of life didn't stop for the cold, where the relentless pursuit of a better life kept people moving forward. London wasn't just a city. It was a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, adapt, and hope for a brighter tomorrow. That said, thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed this journey back to Victorian London, please consider subscribing to be notified of our next adventure. And until then, remember, the coldest winters always end. Imagine you're walking down a cobblestone street. The air is crisp and the sky is gray. All around you are buildings with flickering gas lights illuminating the way. A thin layer of ice covers the ground and crunches beneath your boots. Suddenly, you see it. A group of kids gathered around a makeshift sled made of wood and rags. You ask, "What are you doing?" And one of them looks up with hopeful eyes and says, "Sledding." But this isn't your typical snowy day in childhood. This is a fight for survival. These children aren't playing. They're racing against the clock, trying to make the most of this rare moment of joy before they have to return to their bleak reality. Welcome to the first episode of our series where we bring you tales of humanity struggle for survival. during the harshest winters in history. From the heart of London to the frozen landscapes of Russia, you'll witness the resilience of the human spirit as people battle against the elements and despair. Our journey begins in the bustling city of London in 1847. Imagine a time when Jack Frost painted his icy designs on every window pane, turning the city into a winter wonderland. Yet this beauty was only skin deep. Beneath the surface, London was gripped by an unrelenting battle against the elements. Now, let me ask you something. How can you tell when a child has worked too hard? Have you ever looked closely at the hands of a kid? What do they tell you? For these children, their hands speak volumes, rough and dirty, from hours spent sweeping chimneys. But it's not just the grime that catches your eye. No, these hands bear silent scars, their small fingers bent at unnatural angles, some even missing. Why? Because in this world, a child's work is never done, especially during winter. When the biting cold sets in, the chimneys demand constant attention. These little ones brave freezing temperatures, clambering into narrow flues. Each sweep takes a chance, gambling with life itself. For in those dark tunnels, danger lurks around every bend, threatening to snuff out their young lives. We meet our guide, a veteran chimney sweep who knows the dangers all too well. He lost his son to the job. We follow him as he leads his team of young sweeps, some as young as 6 years old, into the soot-filled flues of London's grand houses. They climb, they scrape, and they cough, filling the air with tiny coughs that echo in the silence of the great halls above. Above them, the rich bask in the glow of their roaring fires, unaware of the toll it takes to keep their homes warm. For each sweep is not just a worker, but a small candle in the darkness, illuminating the hidden cost of their comfort. Meanwhile, in the city's crowded slums, life is a different kind of gamble. The game here is played with hunger as the stakes. Meet Margaret, a young mother with hollow cheeks and haunted eyes. Her hands, once smooth and youthful, are now chapped and scarred. Her feet are bare, her skirts hang in rags, and she walks with a limp, a souvenir from a lifetime of deprivation. To feed her family, she ventures out into the icy streets. She joins the ranks of street vendors, hawking their wares in the biting cold. Her voice, though hoarse from coughing, rings out with the desperate hope of one more sale, one more coin to stave off hunger. And then we see Thomas, an elderly gentleman dressed in a threadbare coat. His face, etched with lines of hardship, tells the story of a life worn down by poverty. His hands, gnarled and shaky, hold out a tin cup. As he shuffles through the slushy streets, the icy pavement reflecting the misery in his eyes. Every step is a gamble, a roll of the dice with hunger as the prize. Our guide leads us deeper into London's frosty labyrinth, showing us how each day becomes a fight against the elements, against despair. We visit Mrs. Bradley, who risks her life by burning coal indoors. Her home, a rickety hovel, is filled with the stench of stale waste and chamber pots. But she's willing to risk it all for a bit of warmth. For in this world, a flicker of hope burns brighter than the fear of death. But the true cost of winter hits us as our guide points to the frozen faces staring blankly from the streets. Everywhere we see vacant eyes staring into the abyss, their lifeless gaze a chilling reminder of the toll the season takes. In this frozen panorama, life hangs in the balance, and every breath becomes a testament to the indomitable spirit of survival. Now, let's travel back in time to the heart of Imperial Russia in 19th century St. Petersburg. Imagine yourself stepping into the majestic winter palace, where the opulence is suffocating, the ballrooms echoing with the gaiety of the Russian nobility. But beyond these gilded walls, a different story unfolds. The streets are a treacherous maze of ice and snow, where common folk struggle to stay alive. Our guide, a seasoned police officer, leads us through the maze of Imperial Russia. His face, weathered by the icy winds of countless winters, tells a tale of resilience. He's seen the best and the worst of society, and today's a stark reminder of the stark divide between the haves and the have-nots. We see Catherine, a young woman with rosy cheeks and braided hair, bundled in layers to withstand the Siberian chill. She carries a basket of fish, her breath misting in the frigid air. But beneath the vibrant scarf hiding her face, a steely resolve shines through. With each step, she's not just braving the weather, she's defying it. Then there's Alexei, a grizzled man with calloused hands and a tired gait. He wears a long, heavy coat, its fur collar turned up against the wind. His eyes, though weathered, hold a glimmer of determination. He's a scavenger, searching for whatever he can find in the frozen wasteland, always looking for something worth salvaging. Our guide shows us how the city transforms into a battleground, where survival is the ultimate test. We visit the sprawling markets, where vendors hawk their wares amidst the mounds of snow. The vibrant colors of the fabrics stand out against the white backdrop, but the smiles are few and far between. As we venture deeper into the city, we witness the heart-wrenching sight of families huddled together for warmth. Children with rosy cheeks pressed against their parents, seeking solace in the shared struggle. The elderly wrapped in layers, their faces etched with the memories of winters past. And the sick, their coughs echoing in the frosty air, their bodies frail and vulnerable. But our guide reveals the darkest corners of this frozen city, where the shadows are long and the hope is thin. We come across the abandoned and the destitute, those who've given up the fight against the biting cold. Faces frozen in masks of despair, their eyes reflecting the emptiness of their souls. In the depths of St. Petersburg's winter, survival is a gamble, a toss of the coin to see whether you'll see the next sunrise. But through it all, the human spirit endures, clinging to hope like a lifeline in a sea of ice and snow. So what do you think? Which story resonated with you the most? The desperate race against the cold in London or the hopeless struggle for survival in St. Petersburg? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more such gripping tales of history. Until next time, stay warm and safe. Have you ever been caught in a blizzard? You know, one of those storms where the wind screams and the snow falls sideways? It's an experience that sticks with you. You see the world whipped into a frenzy, and you realize how tiny you are against nature's raw power. Well, now picture that scene, but drag it on for weeks. Now, add in masses of people packed together in crowded cities. Imagine their struggles to stay alive, to keep their businesses going, and you get a glimpse of what it was like when winter slammed into Victorian London. The year was 1880, and the place was London, England. We're talking about a city brimming with life. Over 6 million people called this place home, all of them trying to make it in the sprawling maze of streets. Back then, London was like a giant game of hopscotch. If you landed on the right square, you might hit it big. But if not, well, you might just survive. Either way, it was a gamble and everyone was playing. And then winter decided to deal its own hand. Snow blanketed the streets, frost nipped at faces, and icy waves slithered through cracks in the walls. It was the kind of winter that makes you huddle closer to your cup of tea and wish the day would hurry up and end. And as the fog rolled in, London transformed. The gaslights struggled to pierce the gloom, and each lamppost became an island in a sea of white. People hurried past, their faces pale, their shoulders stooped against the wind. The city, once vibrant and teeming with life, was now draped in gray. It was a scene that made you wonder if spring would ever return. But people did what they had to do. Shopkeepers brushed snow from their wares. Street vendors hawked their last few apples, and businessmen hurried along, their collars turned up against the biting wind. Even the horses seemed to shuffle slower, their breath misting in the cold. Everyone was waiting for the sun to win the battle against the clouds, hoping for a glimpse of blue in the endless gray. For Londoners, winters weren't just chilly. They were a test of spirit, of resourcefulness, of endurance. Life in the heart of London was a constant struggle. Rents were due, children needed feeding, and jobs demanded attention regardless of the weather. So Londoners learned to adapt. They donned layers of clothing, sharing what they could. The wealthy might have indulged in fur-lined coats, while the poor made do with whatever they had, patching and mending until it was time to replace it altogether. The Industrial Revolution had drawn people in droves to London, promising work and a chance at a better life. But it had also created harsh living conditions. Slums were packed, resources were strained, and when winter arrived, it exposed the city's weak spots. Families huddled together for warmth, finding solace in numbers. For a moment, the biting wind outside didn't matter as much as the love shared between parents and children. They told stories, sang songs, and dreamed of warmer days. They were resilient, these Londoners, resourceful and tight-knit. They shared what little they had, helping neighbors whenever they could. It was a community bound together by hardship, finding strength in unity. They took care of their own, creating a network of support that transcended the cold. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the streets grew darker and colder. The gaslights flickered on, casting an eerie glow on the falling snow. London was a city that never slept, but in winter it did its best to catch up on its rest. The rhythmic clip-clop of horse hooves echoed through the empty streets. Street lamps painted pools of yellow light on the snow, turning each intersection into a miniature stage. The wind whispered through the chimneys, carrying tales of warmth and comfort to those who had none. Each snowflake that fell was a reminder of the cold seeping into homes, into lives. The river flowed, indifferent to the plight of those struggling to stay afloat, its waters mirroring the gray sky above. As the full moon rose, it cast long shadows on the snow-covered rooftops. London looked like a watercolor painting, beautiful but tinged with melancholy. And as the clock tower chimed midnight, the echoes reverberated through the frosty air, marking the passing hours, reminding people of the long night ahead. The relentless chill pressed in, driving people indoors, sealing them in their fates. Some sought refuge in the flickering light of cheap public houses, sharing stories and dreams of a brighter tomorrow. Others retreated to their beds, seeking solace in sleep, if only for a few stolen hours. In the heart of London, life played out its drama. Amidst the winter's embrace, amidst the economic shifts, the social tensions, and the relentless march of industrialization, life went on. People worked, ate, slept, and dreamed. They laughed, they cried, and they hoped. And through it all, the city stood, bearing witness to the quiet struggles, the triumphs and tragedies, the joys and sorrows. Each person had their story, a narrative woven into the very fabric of the city. And together they formed the soul of London, a mosaic of experiences and emotions. London was a tapestry of sounds, and even in winter its melody played on. Horse-drawn carts rattled over the cobblestones, their rhythmic clatter a familiar tune. Hawkers called out their wares, their voices competing with the wind. In the distance, the rumble of industry echoed, a testament to the city's ceaseless energy. And above it all, the wind sang its mournful song, weaving through the canyons of buildings, whistling down alleys, and sighing through bare branches. This was London's winter song, a symphony of struggle and resilience. At the height of winter, in the dead of night, something happened that brought the city to its knees. It was White Monday, January 1884. A storm raged across London, whipping the Thames into a frenzy and blanketing the streets in thick, wet snow. The wind howled, shaking houses and rattling windows, determined to test the mettle of the city. Trees bowed under the weight of the snow, transforming London into a winter wonderland. But this was no fairy tale. People struggled to free themselves from the clutches of the blizzard. The cold was a tangible force, pressing in from all sides, seeping through clothes and chilling bones. Commuters were stranded, shops shuttered, and the usually bustling streets transformed into ghost towns. As night fell, the storm intensified, plunging London into darkness. Gaslights flickered, unable to pierce the thick, swirling snow. The city was a labyrinth of white, trapping people within its icy embrace. As temperatures plummeted, people huddled indoors, desperately seeking warmth. Fires roared in a few fortunate homes, casting flickering shadows on anxious faces. But for many, the night was long and cold. With the storm raging outside, people watched in fear as the fire in their hearts threatened to dwindle. And then there was Jack London, born in 1876 in London. His birth name was John Griffith London. He had a twin sister named Joan. Their mother, Flora, left their father, George, shortly after their birth and emigrated with her children to the United States. George, who was incapable of caring for his offspring, abandoned them to the workhouse where they grew up without a single shred of affection or parental guidance. His most vivid memory is of sitting in the corner of a room filled with cribs, watching other children being taken away by adopting families. He was passed between foster homes, and his early adulthood was marked by poverty, squalor, and exposure to the harsh realities of life. He held odd jobs, was briefly a sailor, and eventually became a miner in Alaska. He returned to the United States, served in the Army, and then traveled extensively, witnessing firsthand the struggles of ordinary people against the backdrop of an ever-changing world. Inspired by his experiences, he began writing and published his first novel, The Son of the Wolf, in 1900. Throughout his career, he wrote prolifically, tackling themes of poverty, injustice, and the human condition. His most famous works include The Call of the Wild, White Fang, The Sea Wolf, and The Iron Heel. His writing style was direct, powerful, and emotionally charged. He used his keen observations of nature and his understanding of the complexities of human behavior to craft compelling narratives that continue to resonate with readers today. His novella, The Call of the Wild, tells the story of Buck, a dog stolen from his comfortable life in California and thrust into the harsh environment of the Klondike Gold Rush through Buck's adventures. London explores themes of survival, loyalty, and the primal instincts that lie dormant within us. Another iconic work is White Fang, which is a companion piece to The Call of the Wild. Set in the same time and place, it tells the story of a wolf dog who is captured and trained to become a sled dog. The novella examines the bond between humans and animals and the impact of our actions on the natural world. His novel, The Sea Wolf, is a tale of adventure and survival set aboard a sailing ship. It follows Humphrey Van Weyden, a writer who finds himself stranded on the ship after it becomes damaged in a storm. The story explores themes of good versus evil, civilization versus savagery, and the power of the natural world. London's writing often tackled social and political issues. In The Iron Heel, he presents a dystopian future in which a ruthless dictatorship has crushed society. The novel is a powerful critique of capitalism and the dangers of unchecked power. Jack London died on November 22, 1916, at the age of 40. His death is shrouded in mystery, and several theories exist, including suicide, murder, and accidental overdose. Despite the uncertainty surrounding his death, his literary legacy endures. His powerful prose, compelling characters, and thought-provoking themes continue to captivate readers worldwide. Let me know if you like the story. So we are actually having a heat wave here. We usually have temperatures around 86 degrees Fahrenheit in Las Vegas in the middle of February. So we are actually having a heat wave right now. Hi, this is your host, and you're listening to a podcast. Today we're going to talk about what life was like in London during the coldest winter of the Industrial Revolution. And before we begin, please make sure to follow our social media accounts. Our team works really hard every week to bring you guys new videos, and we'd really appreciate it if you followed us. Also, we have another channel that we started where we share updates and behind-the-scenes stuff. By February of 1847, the cold was no longer a novelty, it was just normal. The frost on the inside of the windows, expected. The way your breath hung in the air like a ghost you couldn't escape, ordinary. The pain in your fingers as you tried to lace your boots or stir your tea, a daily reminder that winter still had its claws in you. And by now, people had stopped hoping it would end soon. There was no magical thaw. No sudden burst of sunlight that made everyone dance in the streets. Victorian winters didn't end, they slowly retreated. Like a siege lifting. But before that slow retreat began, February often delivered one last cruel blow. This was the month when stores ran low, firewood became scarce. Soup kitchens turned people away earlier, everyone had already worn their best layers thin. And just when the body had nothing left to give, the temperature would drop again. Londoners called it the hungry month. London was stuck in the grip of winter, and hunger stalked the streets. The rats grew bold. They skittered through alleys and basements in search of crumbs. Cats starved, dogs fought in the streets. The market sold spoiled meat at full price, and those who could afford none of it rooted through the trash heaps behind the butcheress. Families broke apart over food. Some parents gave their children to orphanages not because they didn't love them, but because they thought they might have a better chance at survival with a bowl of gruel a day. It was during these late winter weeks that the true tragedies unfolded, quietly, without drama. A boy found in the doorway of a shuttered shop, stiff and pale, a widow who never answered her neighbor's knock. A whole family wrapped in blankets, sleeping forever in the corner of a cellar. And still, the city moved, carriages rolled. Smoke rose, factories thundered, the mail was delivered. The newspapers arrived, though fewer read them now. They spoke of elections and empire and foreign wars, but not much of the boy in the shop doorway, or the widow, or the cellar family. In the heart of the city, theater performances continued, though the audience often arrived late, wrapped in scarves and furs. Men wore tall hats dusted with snow. Women in satin gloves sat in velvet seats while musicians played softly, and the fog pressed against the grand glass doors like an animal shut out in the cold. And yet there were plays to watch. People wanted distraction. Maybe they just didn't have anything else to do. Maybe it was cheaper than food. Maybe a night in the theater meant you didn't have to beg that evening. Who knows? But actors performed. And speaking of food, what of the government? Ah, yes, well, there were meetings. Speeches, reports on poverty and health, but little action. The poor, it was said, had fallen upon hard times. But that was their fault, wasn't it? Laziness, moral weakness. Too many children. Not enough discipline. There were a few attempts at reform, sure. Some laws passed, workhouses were inspected. Sanitation boards filed their usual complaints. But by and large, the system stayed the same. The rich stayed rich, the poor stayed cold. And speaking of workhouses, by February, they were full to bursting. There were rules, of course. You couldn't just walk in. You had to be admitted. You had to sign papers, give up your freedom, accept that you'd eat gruel and split from your family and wear a uniform. And once you were inside, the doors rarely opened again until spring, unless it was feet first. Many tried to avoid the workhouse at all costs. They begged instead. They stole. They slept standing up in pub doorways and under carts and beside gas lamps. Some found empty sheds or boarded-up shops. But even these were claimed quickly. Territory, shelter, a place to lean your back and maybe survive till morning. Children, oh, the children grew old before their time. Their cheeks were red from wine-burn, their eyes dull. They learned to hide from constables, to dart between feet, to ask for coins without looking too pitiful, but not too bold either. Just enough to trigger sympathy. And yet there was play, yes, even in the cold. You might see a child laugh, chasing a hoop with a stick down a snowy street. Or hear a group of boys shouting as they slide on ice patches near the park gates. Girls huddled together, sharing warm stones or pretending that broken dolls were princesses in enchanted castles. Imagination was warmth, laughter, a kind of protest. No one could take that. But the danger never left. One child falls. Head strikes cobblestone. There's no money for doctors. Just rags and whispered prayers. Sometimes they survive. Sometimes they don't. And if the cold didn't get you, the sickness did. Remember, this was an age of tuberculosis, of typhoid, of influenza. Coughs were not just coughs. They were warnings. You could hear it in the rhythm of the streets. Hack spit, pause hack again. The old coughed. The young coughed, horses coughed, buildings coughed, London itself seemed to wheeze through winter. Some wore scarves over their mouths to block the fog. Others smeared lard on their chests or burned herbs in clay pots. Home remedies, hope in disguise, but nothing truly worked. And yet life continued. Bells rang out for weddings, even in February. A couple might marry in a thin chapel with frost on the altar, holding hands with red, cracked fingers. Somewhere else, a child was born in a room no warmer than the outside. They swaddled it in anything they had, shawls, old curtains, even newspaper. And now it's time for our What Were You Doing? Segment where we ask what you were doing during the pandemic. We got a lot of good ones for this episode. How about this one from Kayla? She says, I was born during a blizzard in Minnesota. Ooh, how about this one from Helen? She says, I was cuddled up inside watching movies and eating snacks while everyone else was freaking out. How about this one from James? I was getting married. My wife and I were married on February 2020, 2 days before everything closed down. We were supposed to have a huge wedding with 300 guests. Instead, we had 6 witnesses. I'm so glad she still said yes. If you want to submit yours, leave us a comment or send us a message. but the factories kept chugging along. Black smoke poured out their chimneys and steam hissed from their engines. If you needed a new hat or umbrella or coat, you could find it. If you needed shoes, boots, gloves, stockings, shirts, drawers, you could find them. And if you needed something fancier, well, then you shopped on Oxford Street or Regent Street or the Strand. You entered a temple of light and warmth. You climbed stairs carpeted in red. You looked through window displays filled with silk and velvet and fur. And if you could afford it, you bought it. But if you couldn't, you walked past and shivered. Then you hurried home before your toes froze. On the darkest evenings, men drank in smoky pubs. They sipped beer or whiskey and tried to forget the cold. The barkeep knew most of them by name. He knew their usual order and how much they earned and how many children they had waiting for food. The barkeep, he knew because he had those same worries too. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. Inside, men talked and laughed. Sometimes someone played a fiddle. Occasionally, someone broke a glass or spilled a tankard. But mostly they just drank and told stories, jokes, news, gossip. They compared scars and shook dice and dreamed of the sun. The ladies were at home. Most of them, they tried to keep a fire going. They mended clothes and counted shillings and prayed that the fever wouldn't come. They knew that if it did, they might not have the means to fight it. But some of the ladies weren't at home. They were out in the streets trying to earn a few coins. Shopkeepers trusted them less and less these days, and with each passing month it was harder to make sales. For many women, it was easier to stand on the corner and hawk matches or flowers or lottery tickets. And some were old pros at this, veterans of the streets, knowing how to deal with the customers, how to handle the police, how to survive the night. All across the sprawling city, lives went on. Frozen fingers, aching bellies, endless fog, the omnipresent fear of disease. And yet, something stirred. Perhaps it was foolish hope. Perhaps it was sheer stubbornness. But something kept London alive. And maybe that was enough. Oh, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. When feeling out of myself, I love thee still. For every high and low, my heart will borrow. From thy full sail like a bird, thou dost expand my song. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnets from the Portuguese are a series of 44 poems written by the English poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning to her husband, the poet Robert Browning. The collection was published anonymously in 1850 and dedicated to my hidden one, which has led many readers to believe that the sonnets were inspired by an affair rather than a marriage. But the hidden one was Robert Browning, whom Lizzie had met and fallen madly in love with while reading his works. Their love story is beautiful, and today we're going to take inspiration from her sonnets and count the ways we love this incredible city. And then, finally, mercifully spring returned. It didn't come with fanfare or trumpets. Victorian London never did anything quite that romantic. No sudden blossoms bursting open or sun-drenched meadows. No, spring in London arrived like everything else did back then, reluctantly, carefully, quietly. One day, the ice didn't return to the window panes. Another, the fog lifted just enough to reveal rooftops again. And by the end of March, the chill had retreated into corners still there in alleyways and under bridges, still hanging about in the morning, but no longer the master of the city. London could breathe again, but the city was not the same. The long, brutal winter had left its mark. It had worn grooves into the faces of the poor. It had taken its toll on backs, on hands, on lungs. You could see it in the way people walked more slowly now, hunched, cautious. You could see it in the empty chairs by fireplaces and the extra gravestones in the churchyards. Still, life moved on, the river thawed. Mudlarks returned to its banks, picking through whatever the Thames had coughed up over winter. Markets grew louder. Hawkers called with more spirit, their wares slightly fresher. A few early flowers appeared in window boxes, pale, shaky things with petals that trembled in the wind like survivors. The city's children, those who'd made it run again, laughed again, shouted and chased and filled the streets with noise and energy. You'd never know how close some had come to vanishing. You'd never guess that just a few weeks ago they de-huddled in doorways or shared a crust between 5 siblings. And the adults? They swept, they washed, they buried their dead. They put away the rags they'd worn as scarves and hung out clothes that no longer steamed when wet. They patched roofs and sealed chimneys and mended boots. They didn't say much about the winter, they never did. Silence was easier. Memory was heavy. In parlors across the wealthier districts, the talk had already turned to summer holidays, trips to the coast, country homes reopening, new fashions for the warmer season. Winter was a footnote, an inconvenience to be discussed over tea. But in the East End, it lingered. People whispered about neighbors who hadn't survived, about children who'd stopped coughing only after they stopped breathing, about men who never came home from the docks and women who'd gone to sleep one night and hadn't woken up. There was no ceremony for those losses, no headlines, just absence. Some of the lucky ones found new jobs as the weather warmed. Construction picked up again, factories reopened their windows. Even chimney sweeps, exhausted from the soot and cold, found their work less suffocating in spring. And of course the city's great machine continued. The carriages rolled on, the bells rang. The fog, while thinner, now still curled between rooftops in the early morning. But people didn't flinch at it the way they had a month ago. It no longer whispered death. It just whispered London. But for all the suffering, all the cold and hunger and heartbreak, there was something else that lingered too. Something quieter, resilience. It showed in the way two women shared firewood without speaking. In the way a boy stopped to help an old man up icy steps. In the way families who had barely survived somehow invited neighbors to share the soup pot once the weather softened. Victorian London was brutal, yes, but it was also stubborn. And that stubbornness somehow became a kind of beauty. In the poorest neighborhoods, people planted small pots of herbs in windows, hoping for something green. Chimneys were cleaned out not just for use but for dignity. Churches held spring sermons that spoke not of guilt or punishment, but of endurance, of surviving the flood, the storm, the winter. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone would laugh too loud in the street, and the neighbors wouldn't hush them. They'd smile. Because that sound, after months of silence, was a kind of music. Even the Thames seemed to sigh with relief, flowing a little faster, a little clearer. But the truth, of course, was that another winter would come. Maybe not as harsh, maybe worse. The city would always circle back to cold. That was the rhythm of London centuries of frost and fog and fire, life and death marching side by side down the same muddy lanes. Still, for now, the beds were warmer. The streets were louder, the soup was thicker, and hope that fragile, flickering candle burned again in the windows of even the smallest, coldest homes. The workhouses emptied slowly, families reunited cautiously. Children were registered for schools, and doctors made rounds with fewer funerals. The scars remained, but they were no longer fresh. And deep down, in cellars and attics and alleys and crowded rooms, the people of London, those who had survived, did what they always did. They endured, because endurance was not a choice. It was a way of life. And somewhere in that endurance, among the ashes of old coal fires and the echoes of empty stomachs, something else quietly bloomed. A kind of victory. Not grand, not glorious, but real. Because to live through a Victorian winter in London wasn't just to survive the cold. It was to look death in the eye and say, not yet, not this time. London is our constant companion. We meet her in the tube, walk with her through the parks, sit with her in the squares, dance with her in the clubs, dream with her in the museums, whisper to her in the libraries, eat with her in the markets, drink with her in the pubs. She is the backdrop of our lives here. Whether we have been here 1 week or 20 years, she is our constant companion. So today, let's count the ways we love her. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. When feeling out of myself, I love thee still. For every high and low, my heart will borrow. From thy full sail, like a bird, thou dost expand my song. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week with more stories. Until then, keep exploring.